Parents are on red alert for an emerging threat to their children. Criminals are targeting kids through sextortion. That's where children are tricked into sharing explicit photos that are then extorted for money. Today, the Minnesota Department of Public Safety held a press conference to give parents advice on how to discuss this with their kids.
We're going to ask Minnesota's parents to have some tough conversations with their kids. We've talked about sextortion before criminals convincing victims to send explicit messages of themselves and then threatening to release the images unless the victim complies with their demands. In the past, we've talked about how the criminal is often a sexual predator, trying to get more explicit images or to meet for a sexual encounter. But what we're seeing in Minnesota now is a significant surge in a different kind of sextortion. Sextortion that isn't about sex. It's straight up blackmail, financial sextortion. And their target is most often are young boys, anywhere from 10 to 17 years of age. And as a grandparent of children this age, I cannot stress enough that while we can and are investigating these crimes and we're working to hold criminals accountable, we need parents to help us prevent this crime from happening in the first place. Understand that yes, this crime can happen to your child. Educate your children about the dangers of sharing images and information online. And please, make sure your children know that they can come to you if they fall victim to one of these criminals.
Our BCA predatory crimes agents began receiving tips about Minnesota boys being blackmailed through sextortion schemes a couple of years ago. Since then, we've learned of hundreds of additional incidents here in Minnesota and more than 3,000 victims nationwide. The crime always has the same pattern. Most often it's a boy befriended on social media or gaming sites by someone purporting to be a beautiful girl. She convinces him to share an explicit image or video of himself that shows his face. Immediately, the blackmailer demands money or gift cards from the victim, threatening to release explicit images if they don't. If money isn't provided, threats escalate to threatening to kill the victim or their loved ones and continue with these threats over and over. At this point, the threats escalate further to phone calls, extreme pressure to find a way to produce the money. The pressure doesn't let up. And again, some of these victims have been as young as 10 years old. These criminals are opportunists. While boys are the primary targets of these crimes, young girls are being targeted too. If the money is never provided, the blackmailer releases photos on social media. In some cases, they've released photos even after the money is sent. Tragically, these crimes have led to more than a dozen young people committing suicide in the past year across the United States. What we're here today is to bring attention to this, and as the Commissioner noted, for parents to talk to their children about this, for trusted adults to talk to young kids about this, for everybody to have conversations with young persons so that we can protect them, because these crimes are being originated overseas, and so it's very difficult for us to hold people accountable. So the way that we will get out of this problem is through education of our young people. We have seen this over the years, but what we're seeing is a rapid escalation of these types of cases, both here in Minnesota and across the United States. Our federal partners are sounding the alarm about the very same issue, and while we've seen this type of behavior in the past, what we've seen in the significant change is that it's being strictly for financial reasons, trying to exploit these vulnerable middle school and teenagers to providing these types of this money for this particular crime. So it's definitely increased very rapidly.
The Department of Public Safety also released a video of an interview it did with a mother whose son was a victim of this kind of sextortion. Her picture is blurred to protect the identity of her and her family. She shared her family's harrowing story to prevent others from having to go through the same thing.
Our son came into the bedroom and instantly we knew something was wrong based on the look on his face. And he started crying. He had his phone in his hand and he just said, "My life is over." And so we asked what was wrong, and it took a few minutes. He was so scared and I think shocked by the whole thing that had transpired that he he couldn't get the words out. And so after a few minutes, he was able to tell us that he was being threatened on social media. A day before, he had gotten a friend request on Instagram. And it was a friend request just from someone that he didn't know. And he accepted that. And the person appeared to be a 14-year-old teenager. And they were just talking back and forth, building a rapport together, and that basic relationship online. And she asked if he wanted to have some fun. The conversation ended up leading into them asking him to take pictures of himself. And after looking at the messages myself, what was scary from a parent's perspective is how they were very, very skilled at getting him to do exactly what they wanted. And we have had conversations at our house, and even with those conversations, it was a learning experience, just to know that I think even more frequent conversations, 1 or 2 conversations about what can happen, just isn't enough, because he thought, he's a 14-year-old boy, and they just knew exactly what to do to manipulate him into, when sexual things weren't on his mind, to steer the conversation in that direction. So he ended up taking images of himself in exactly the way they instructed, which included images with his face in them. They then took photos of his friends online. They went on, because they had contacted him and friended him through a couple different social media networks, they were able to find him on several different social media sites, and they took images of all of his friends. So they identified who he was connected with through social media, and then sent him back the images that he had sent, of course, which were explicit images, and included his face. They got those images, and the conversation shifted instantly. So it went from a really friendly and, I guess at that point, sexual conversation to a very threatening conversation. They instantly, the first piece was sending him those images of himself and of his friends, so he knew instantly what they could do, and they made it very clear that they wanted to ruin his life, and they had no issue doing that. The first request was for $400, and his response was that I'm 14 years old, I don't have that kind of money. I believe that they had instructed him that he could steal credit cards from his parents, from us. Where we were really thankful is that they threatened him. He said he didn't have that kind of money. He said he had a Dairy Queen gift card and that he had gotten for Christmas that had $10, and a $10 Target gift card, and he offered those to them. And they threatened his life at that time. He never sent any money, but at that point they started calling his phone through Snapchat. You can call through Snapchat, which I learned, and there was further harassment through there. We were able to get in touch with a law enforcement officer from the BCA, and they linked us up to a resource that's a rather new resource, and that essentially you can make it so you can mark the photos so that if they're loaded online through algorithms, they're instantly taken down. And so it was through the resources that law enforcement agencies put out there and the quick reaction from the law enforcement agencies and the agents that we got to work with, that within minutes, literally, we had the photos marked so they couldn't be posted online, and a case started. We have worked really closely with the agents from the BCA, and they've been great at updating us. They sent subpoenas out immediately to get the information from those accounts that the criminals were using, and they were able to locate where they came from. And one thing that was really comforting to us is just because a criminal operates internationally doesn't mean that our federal law enforcement agencies don't pursue those cases. Our son is not comfortable using social media at this time. It really traumatized him from using social media, and it really scared him. He learned a few lessons coming out of this. First and foremost, he learned that these things happen to anyone. It doesn't target a specific demographic, a geographic location, age range, race. There's no discrimination of who they will target. They just want the money, and it doesn't matter who it's from. I think communication is the most important thing, and making sure that you're communicating with your kids about social media and setting boundaries and educating them at the beginning, the time they start using social media. I would recommend to parents, before they get their first account, that conversation should take place about what can happen and what are the boundaries, and making sure that you're checking their accounts and staying on top of what they're doing. We thought we had boundaries in place, and we didn't. He was able to change some of the parental settings very easily, and we didn't know that. So he was on his phone when we thought the phone was a brick at night. And that is not the case. And I think as parents, we were just a little too trusting to think that, you set up some of these parental controls and it's gonna monitor the situation for you. And as a parent, I have now learned I need to be actively involved in that phone on a regular basis. And as I said, for communication, I think having a communication at the front end of when they start using it, and continuing that communication, because the conversations, if they're regular, they're not going to feel awkward.